Usually when we talk about mastering a new skill, there's this underlying expectation of sweat.
Right, the whole no pain, no gain mentality.
Exactly. It's like lifting weights in a gym. You lift a heavy iron, your muscles tear, you feel the burn, and eventually, they rebuild stronger. The pain is essentially the proof of your progress.
Yeah, which makes sense for biceps,
But step into the world of language learning, and that entire gym metaphor actually destroys your progress. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a stack of research, proving that if you are constantly struggling and sweating over a new language, you are mathematically guaranteeing that you will never become fluent.
It is a massive paradigm shift, honestly. For generations, we have treated language acquisition like a grueling math problem that has to be solved through sheer force of will, memorization, repetition.
Doing endless flashcards.
Endless. And letting go of that mindset is incredibly relieving, especially for anyone listening who has ever felt like a failure in a high school Spanish or French class.
Oh, I think that's basically everyone. And to understand why that traditional method is failing us, we've pulled together a wildly diverse stack of sources for today's deep dive.
Yeah, we have a really interesting mix today.
We really do. First, we're looking at the metadata for this dense 262-page academic text by Sandra Götz. It's called Fluency in Native and Non-Native English Speech, which, by the way, goes for about 91 euros.
A hefty price tag for a textbook.
Right. And we're contrasting that with Rachana Bansal's highly practical course book, Get Fluent English Step by Step.
Which is much more of a traditional structural approach.
Exactly. And then we're bridging the gap between those traditional structures and modern linguistics, using a deeply personal YouTube diary from a polyglot named Veronika.
Her story is fascinating, by the way.
Super fascinating. And alongside all that, we have a cutting-edge 2025 scientific article from the Universidad Laica Eloy Alfaro de Manabi down in Ecuador, which is all about using artificial intelligence to teach high schoolers.
And what becomes immediately apparent when you synthesize all of this material, all these different perspectives, is that our fundamental definition of fluency is deeply flawed.
How so?
Well, we tend to view fluency as the complete absence of errors, right? Like perfect machine-like grammar. But when you look at Sandra Götz's academic text, the data tells a completely different story about what actually happens when people speak in the real world.
Okay, let's unpack this because Götz's research really anchors this whole discussion. Her book analyzes the quantifiable markers of native versus non-native speech. She isn't just looking at grammar test scores.
Right, she's looking at how speech flows in real time.
Yeah, she is measuring temporal variables. We're talking about articulation rate, the mean length of speaking runs, and the exact duration of pauses.
And crucially, she measures filled pauses.
Filled pauses.
Yeah, those are the ums and you-knows that we all use. The assumption in a traditional classroom is that a native speaker delivers perfect, uninterrupted paragraphs. But Götz metadata proves that native speakers pause and use fillers constantly.
Wait, constantly?
Constantly. The distinguishing factor isn't whether they pause, but where they pause and how they recover from it.
Okay, that distinction is fascinating. From what I read in the text, a native speaker usually pauses at grammatical boundaries, like between two clauses, to sort of plan their next overarching thought.
Exactly. It's structural planning.
But a non-native speaker, who is heavily reliant on traditional textbook methods, tends to pause mid-clause because they are actively searching for a specific vocabulary word or trying to conjugate a verb in real time.
Which brings us to the limitations of Rachana Bansal's Get Fluent English Step by Step. I mean, books like Bansal's represent the standard practical approach we all know.
Right, the whole Unit 1, Unit 2 thing.
Exactly. You master the present tense in Unit 1, the past tense in Unit 2, and you build the language block by block. It provides a very logical framework.
But the step-by-step method creates this massive cognitive trap. If your brain is constantly running in the background, trying to recall Chapter 4's rule on past participles while you are in the middle of a sentence, your speech becomes incredibly stilted.
You completely lose that temporal flow that Götz measures.
Exactly. True fluency isn't about having a flawless mental grammar chart. It is simply the ability to express your thoughts without halting the momentum every single time you face a challenge.
Right. And if the step-by-step grammar-first approach often results in that stilted, heavily paused speech, we have to look at what actually creates that natural flow.
So what's the alternative?
Well, in linguistics, the answer points almost uniformly to the work of Stephen Krashen, specifically his input hypothesis. Krashen posits that humans acquire language through exactly one mechanism, and that is understanding messages. He calls this comprehensible input.
Comprehensible input, meaning we don't learn language the way we learn historical dates.
Precisely. Think about how a child learns their mother tongue. Nobody sits a 2-year-old down with a whiteboard to diagram sentence structure.
That would be ridiculous.
Right. The child simply absorbs the language because the adults around them are providing free, pressureless, context-rich messages. They point at a dog and say, dog.
And the child understands the underlying message.
Exactly. And slowly, the language itself is acquired. It is absorbed, not memorized.
Reading Veronika's YouTube diary really snapped this into focus for me. So she is a Russian native speaker who successfully acquired English and Spanish, and she documented this incredible epiphany she had.
Which totally aligns with Gresham's theory.
Completely. Early on, she fully bought into the whole no pain, no gain mentality. But eventually, she realized that if language learning feels easy and almost lazy, yet you are successfully understanding the content, well, that isn't a sign of laziness.
No, it's not.
It is a sign of ultimate efficiency. The struggle does not equal learning.
We really have a hard time accepting that because it feels unearned, like we're cheating somehow. But biologically, when you are understanding a message, your brain's pattern recognition software is doing all the heavy lifting in the background without requiring conscious, painful effort.
Okay, I think I have an analogy for this. Tell me if the mechanics hold up. Comprehensible input operates a lot like playing a video game on normal mode.
Okay, I'm listening.
The game is calibrated just slightly above your current skill level. It pushes you, but you have the tools to survive. You can rely on the visuals, the context clues, and your basic knowledge to figure out how to navigate the level.
Right, you aren't totally lost.
Yeah, so if you're watching a YouTube blogger make breakfast in Italian quasi, you see the eggs, you see the pan. Even if you don't know the exact Italian word for spatula, your brain relies on the visual context to fill in the gap. You understand the message.
The mechanics of that analogy are spot on. You are leveraging external context to decode new linguistic information.
But if you just turn on a dense political thriller in Italian with absolutely no subtitles, that is playing the game on nightmare mode.
Oh, absolutely.
You have no map, no weapons, and you're immediately overwhelmed. Because you have zero context, it just sounds like noise. Yeah. Your brain can't attach any meaning to the syllables. It's not comprehensible, so absolutely zero acquisition happens.
What's fascinating here is how your nightmare mode analogy maps onto traditional schooling.
Really?
Yeah, because the traditional classroom is heavily indexed on teaching a language, forcing students to analyze its rules, syntax, and exceptions in order to pass a standardized exam. It does not prioritize helping students acquire the language for real-world communication.
Because it's too structured.
Right. In a room of 30 students delivering that perfectly calibrated normal mode input where every individual is receiving messages they can naturally decode, it's a logistical nightmare for a single teacher.
Which naturally leads to a major pushback against Gresham's theory. If comprehensible input is the singular key to fluency, I'm stuck on why immersion doesn't always work.
Ah, the immersion myth.
Yeah. You see, adults move to foreign countries, live there for a decade, surround themselves to the language 24/7, and they still struggle to string a basic sentence together. They are literally drowning in comprehensible input. Why doesn't it sink in?
That is the exact gap Gresham addresses with his second major concept, the affective filter hypothesis. This is where the psychology of learning intersects with linguistics.
Okay, break that down for me.
In linguistic theory, there is a conceptual framework called the language acquisition device, or LAD. It is not a physical organ in the brain, but rather a theoretical model representing our innate human capacity to process and acquire language.
So it's kind of like the mental software running the background language processing.
Exactly. Now, according to the hypothesis, between the comprehensible input in the outside world and your internal language acquisition device, there sits a filter. And this filter is constructed entirely out of your emotional state.
Wait, really? Just emotions?
Yes. Factors like stress, anxiety, boredom, insecurity, and a lack of motivation act as a literal biological and psychological barrier. When those negative emotions are high, the filter goes up.
And what happens when it goes up?
When that filter is elevated, it practically blocks the comprehensible input from reaching the acquisition center. You can be surrounded by the language, but your brain flat out refuses to process it.
Veronika's diary provides the perfect real-world case study of this. She moved from Russia to Mexico City. On paper, it is the ultimate comprehensible input environment. Total Spanish immersion.
But it wasn't that simple.
Not at all. She was dealing with the overwhelming stress of relocating, cultural adjustment, and the anxiety of starting a new life. Her emotional state was so turbulent that for the first 6 months, despite hearing Spanish all day, every day, she learned almost nothing.
Because the affective filter was completely raised.
Exactly. The language just bounced off her.
Her cognitive resources were entirely consumed by managing her stress. There was simply no bandwidth left for the language acquisition device to operate.
But then, you contrast that Mexico City paralysis with how she achieved her breakthrough in English a few years prior. She became deeply, borderline, obsessively interested in veganism.
Right. She found a passion.
Yes, and she wanted to consume every piece of information on the topic, but the best books and articles weren't translated into Russian. She had to read them in English.
Even though her English wasn't perfect.
Right, but her curiosity was so intense that the message of the content became vastly more important than the language it was written in. She was so engrossed in the subject matter that she forgot she was reading a foreign language.
Her affective filter effectively dropped to 0.
Completely. Because motivation was sky high and boredom was non-existent.
When you are genuinely captivated by the material, you stop policing your own language skills. You stop worrying about whether you understand every single grammar structure and you just hunt for the meaning. That is when the brain's pattern recognition works best.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When you view education through the lens of this affective filter, there's a tragic irony to traditional schooling.
Tragic is the right word.
We take students, sit them in a rigid environment, and force them to do highly repetitive grammar drills, which instantly triggers boredom. Then we ask them to stand up and perform those conjugations out loud in front of 30 judgmental peers while terrified of making a mistake.
Which instantly triggers massive anxiety.
Exactly. Schools are almost mathematically engineered to maximize the affective filter. They are actively triggering the biological mechanism that blocks the very learning they are trying to facilitate.
It is a profound systemic flaw. You are placing students in a high-stakes, high-judgment arena, which practically guarantees that their language acquisition device shuts down out of self-preservation.
So how do we solve this in a formal educational setting? I mean, we can't realistically expect high school teachers to abandon the entire state curriculum and just let kids watch YouTube videos about their personal hobbies all day.
Right, that's just not practical.
So how do we lower this affective filter when grades, performance anxiety, and peer judgment are just an inescapable reality of being a teenager?
This is exactly the challenge taken up by the researchers in our 2025 study from Ecuador. The study was conducted at the Universidad Laica Eloy Alfaro de Manabi by researchers Bianca Hidali Pisco-Tuarez and Diana Carolina Navarrete Pabraga.
Right, and they were working with a sample of 30 high school students from the Cinco de Mayo school.
Yes, and the researchers clearly identified the exact emotional roadblock we're discussing today. The students suffered from a severe lack of fluency and a very limited vocabulary.
But the root cause wasn't a lack of intelligence or capability, right?
Not at all. It was a profound insecurity and a paralyzing fear of expressing themselves in front of their classmates. It was a textbook case of a spiked affective filter.
So the anxiety of public failure was acting as a total barrier.
Exactly. So if the presence of peers is the primary trigger for the filter, the researchers realized they needed a way to remove the social judgment entirely.
And that's where the tech comes in.
Yes. They implemented an artificial intelligence platform called Sesame AI. The strategy was to have the students practice their English interactions with this AI outside of the traditional public classroom dynamic.
Let's picture how this actually works for the student. You are sitting alone talking to an AI avatar. Because it is a machine, the social threat level is absolutely zero.
The AI doesn't laugh if you mispronounce a word.
Exactly. It doesn't roll its eyes if you forget a vocabulary term. It provides a completely private, psychologically safe environment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the AI is not just a digitized version of Rachana Bansal's coursebook. It is functioning as a targeted psychological buffer.
That makes so much sense.
By removing the fear of judgment, it artificially but highly effectively lowers the student's affective filter, allowing the comprehensible input to finally penetrate. And what makes platforms like Sesame AI so powerful is how they handle feedback.
Oh, the feedback loop is brilliant.
The system provides real-time corrective feedback on phonetics, meaning how the words sound syntax, which is the grammar, and lexicon, the vocabulary.
And it does this implicitly, right? It's not stopping the student to hand them a red-inked graded paper.
Right, no red ink.
If a student says to the AI he'd go to the store, The AI naturally responds with something like, oh, he went to the store. What did he buy? It models the correct syntax, went instead of go, without breaking the conversational flow or triggering the student's anxiety. It's targeted practice without the trauma.
Exactly. The teachers monitoring the study noted significant improvements in fluency precisely because of this dynamic. The students were able to practice repeatedly, engaging in trial and error in a safe space until they felt secure enough to speak. They removed the emotional roadblock so the input could finally be processed.
Okay, so we've established the new baseline. You need comprehensible input content that pushes you slightly, like our normal mode game.
Yeah.
And you must lower the affective filter so the brain actually accepts that input.
Whether that's by following a personal obsession like Veronika or utilizing zero-judgment AI tools like the students in Ecuador.
Right. But this leads to the final and perhaps most counterintuitive paradigm shift in our sources. Once you have that safe environment, when is the right time to actually start talking?
The modern linguistic approach to that question completely flips traditional language advice on its head. In a standard classroom, you are expected to produce output speaking and writing from day one.
Repeat after me, class.
Exactly. But the science suggests that output is the result of language acquisition, not the mechanism that causes it.
Wait, so forcing yourself to speak in order to get better at speaking is actually counterproductive?
Initially, yes. Let's break down the cognitive mechanics of what happens when you force early output. You have a complex thought you want to express. Because you haven't acquired the language naturally yet, your brain has to perform a massive real-time calculation.
Like translating on the fly.
Yes. You think of the concept, you translate it into your native language, you actively search your memory for the target language vocabulary, you try to apply the step-by-step grammar rules you learn from a textbook, and then you attempt the physical pronunciation.
All while the person you're talking to is just staring at you, waiting for you to finish the sentence.
It's a cognitive traffic jam.
It really is. You inevitably panic, your mind goes blank, and you start sweating.
And what does that cascade of panic do to your affective filter?
It rockets the filter straight up. It shuts the whole system down.
Exactly. Forcing early output creates extreme anxiety. That anxiety raises the affective filter, which immediately halts any actual learning. You are actively sabotaging your own progress by trying to rush the end result.
So what's the alternative?
In linguistics, we recognize a phase called the silent period. We readily accept that infants go through a silent period of a year or two, absorbing the language around them before they ever utter a coherent word. Adults undergoing language acquisition require a silent period as well.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, if you are actively trying to learn a language right now? Does the silent period mean you were supposed to take a vow of silence for 2 years? Just absorbing YouTube videos until you magically open your mouth and speak flawless Spanish?
Well, the wait is a natural part of the process. The core idea is that if you consistently feed your brain interesting, meaningful, comprehensible input, while intentionally maintaining a calm, low-stress state, the output will eventually happen on its own.
It just spills over.
Yes. Fluency is born when you finally speak because you have absorbed so much of the language that you are genuinely ready to express yourself. It happens naturally and not because a teacher has forced you to read a conjugated verb off a whiteboard.
And that's when you get that natural rhythm we talked about earlier.
Exactly. When you are truly ready, the sentences begin to flow, complete with the natural pauses and temporal rhythms that Sandra Götz measures in native speakers.
That is such a profoundly liberating concept. It completely removes the burden of performance. So, to bring all of this together for everyone listening, if your goal is true fluency, you do not need to drop 91 euros on a dense academic textbook detailing grammatical structures.
Save your money.
Right. And you certainly don't need to torture yourself with endless step-by-step grammar drills. The research dictates that your primary job is to find comprehensible input content that is just slightly above your level, but still entirely understandable through context.
And equally important, you must relentlessly protect your emotional state to keep your affective filter low.
Yes.
That means finding topics you are genuinely, intensely curious about where the message outweighs the medium. And if you are in a position where you must practice output but fear the judgment of others, utilizing an AI platform as a zero-judgment practice space is a proven, highly effective strategy to keep your anxiety in check.
And above all, give yourself the grace of the silent period. Stop forcing yourself to speak before you are ready. Why you should care about all of this is because this research essentially frees you from the guilt of not working hard enough.
That guilt is so common, too.
It really is. If you are struggling, sweating, and feeling miserable while trying to learn a language, you are not lacking discipline. You're just using the wrong methodology. Your current system is fighting your own biology.
This raises an important question, though, and it's something I think is deeply worth reflecting on beyond the realm of language learning.
Oh.
If this affective filter acts as an absolute barrier, shutting down our brain's ability to acquire language whenever we feel stressed, bored, or judged, how much of our learning in other areas of life is being blocked by the exact same mechanism?
Oh, wow. Think about the implications of that.
Right. Consider the phenomenon of math anxiety, where students literally cannot process numbers because the fear of failing is so high. Or trying to learn a complex new coding language while terrified of falling behind your peers.
Or even just sitting through mandatory corporate training where you are fundamentally bored.
Exactly. How much vital information across all disciplines is bouncing right off of us simply because our emotional state, our anxiety, our fear of looking foolish is preventing us from actually letting the information in.
We often assume we have a cognitive limitation, an inability to understand the material, when in reality we have an emotional filter problem. It all circles back to that gym metaphor we started with. We have been socially conditioned to believe that if we aren't feeling the pain, we aren't making progress.
We think we have to tear the mental muscle in order for it to grow.
But the brain isn't a bicep. When it comes to acquisition, it operates much more like a sponge. And a sponge does not absorb water by being squeezed, pressured, and wrung out. It absorbs water when it is allowed to rest, expand, and simply soak it all in. So throw away the heavy flashcards, put on a video you actually enjoy, and let your brain do exactly what it was naturally built to do.